Welcome to the Produce on Purpose podcast, where we experience life being the real you. Today, we have a great guest. His name is Tom Fox. He has over 15 years of experience as a general counsel and chief compliance officer. He has since transitioned into an independent consultant specializing in anti-corruption, anti-bribery compliance, and international transaction issues. His expertise lies in bringing practical business solutions to complex compliance problems. He is a leading voice in compliance, having founded the only podcast network in compliance, the award-winning Compliance Podcast Network. Tom is also a best-selling author, having written 30 books in the areas of compliance, business ethics, and leadership. Tom, so good to have you on Produce on Purpose podcast. Welcome, and how are you today?
Randy, I'm good. I really appreciate taking the time to visit with me. I'm usually in your position on the other side of the mic, so it's great to be interviewed by someone like yourself.
Hey, it is definitely great to have you on. And with an interesting topic, I love that you're bringing up a topic that I think is in the forefront of all businesses. It affects everyone that we have to deal with and work with when it comes down to compliance. So what I'll do is just start off and ask you a little bit. You can go back, tell us a little bit about your journey, how you got to where you are now, and that really what you're going to be able to do and tell us about when it comes to compliance. So how did you get here?
Sure. So the first thing I want your listeners to understand is, and really why I was so excited when I first found out about you and excited to come on this podcast, is people think of your purpose in many ways of, well, it's spiritual, it's my family, it's this or that. And I don't think enough people think of your business or your work can be a part of your purpose. Now, I don't mean to suggest it should be your life, but what I found late in life was I found a real purpose in business, and that literally motivates me, not just every day, but literally in everything I do. And that's amazingly enough in anti-corruption compliance. So my journey is I'm a lawyer by professional training, went to law school, and as probably most young lawyers, you think you're going to change the world. I became a trial lawyer. I represented corporations, found out I really wasn't going to do that representing corporations. And then I went to the corporate world and had a lot of fun as a trial lawyer, had a lot of fun in the corporate world, lived all over the world, traveled all over the world, did contracts all over the world. But I still didn't have that purpose that I found now. And my story is that I was a general counsel of a company who had violated a U.S. law which prevents U.S. companies from engaging in bribery and corruption outside the United States. That's called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And I was part of the new management team that came in after all of the settlement and resolution. And that was when I learned about compliance. And one of the things I was charged to do as the new general counsel was to build a compliance program inside the organization. Well, the company got sold, my job went away, I had a package, and I decided what I really wanted to do with my life was race bicycles.
All right.
So I went on this great adventure to race bicycles. I was over 50. I could ride in the senior division, and I had great fun doing it until one training ride I got taken out by a Hummer. And that ended my cycling career. And so, fortunately, as bad as that was, really wasn't injured too badly. My worst injury was a double fractured left leg, but I was real banged up internally, bruised organs and stuff like that. It just took forever to heal. Yeah. So I convalesced for a few months. It's now 2010. And when I finally got the energy to get on my walker and toddle into my office, I realized I was going to have to go back to work. Mm-hmm. I had no work. I had no clients. And I decided what I really enjoyed in my last job was building a compliance program. And there were very few lawyers at that point doing the nuts and bolts of building compliance programs. And compliance programs are essentially business processes. Mm-hmm. And compliance has a little bit of a legal overlay, but it's essentially a business process. And so I went off on this great journey doing that. Well, as part of that journey, I learned that $3 trillion is lost annually to the international scourge of bribery and corruption, and that there are various solutions to that problem, one of which is the law I mentioned, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and certainly governments and regulators have a role there. But businesses have a role too, and their role is not to bribe to get contracts, not to pay bribes. It's illegal, it's unethical, but because it's illegal, that gets a lot of corporations' attention. And so they put processes in place to prevent their employees from paying bribes. Or if they do, they detect and remediate. And so what I found was, because of the passion I have for this, fighting this international scourge, I found a way I could be involved in that fight literally every day
Okay.
in the corporate world as a consultant by helping companies putting these programs together. And then through my marketing outreach, first was blogging and then it evolved to podcasting. I literally talk to people all day long on podcasts about anti-corruption compliance. And I post those podcasts, so I'm getting out the word. And so I feel like every day I'm pushing the ball forward. And now it may be an inch, but
Yes.
it's further along than it was before. And that corporations doing business ethically and in compliance, I think it's frankly a good thing. And that companies want to do business with other companies that are ethical. And so I believe that I'm helping drive a more ethical business environment generally, and specifically focusing on the anti-corruption component outside the United States. If I could go back to that accident I mentioned, there's a couple of things I would say about that. That the accident opened my eyes. So a lot of people have near-death experiences, and they take a different view of the world. And I'd always known that when the universe shuts a door, another one opens. And you have to be able to see it. But what I learned was from that experience, you have to have the courage to walk through it. And that many people will see that door, but they don't have the courage to walk through. Well, if the universe opens a door for you, walk through it because it's open for a reason. And I really learned that. It only took me, I was 52 then. It only took me till I was 52 to learn that, but it's a pretty valuable lesson. So if the universe opens a door for you, have the courage to walk through it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but at least you're on the right path. And but the purpose I found in the corporate world was something I had not experienced as a lawyer before. Yes, I got to help people, won a few cases, did some contracts for people, all of those things. But I really feel like I'm working on a struggle that's certainly bigger than myself. And I'm a part of that with a group of people, known and unknown, across the globe.
Okay. I love it. I love the idea of it. I know, as we explained in the pre-call, that for a while I worked in a hospital setting. Compliance is huge. We have, and I'm in computer science, technology, of course. There's a lot of compliance in that as well when we're talking about exchanging data. And compliance can sometimes be a dirty word for people because they feel like it's stopping them from doing business. I want to talk a little bit about that because you've been deemed the compliance evangelist. I can tell why, because you love compliance. But share with us, the idea of what compliance is from just the layman's term, and then from a perspective of the benefits of putting in these types of processes, how they can really benefit the bottom line of these businesses.
Sure. So corporate compliance most generally is putting in a business process to comply with some law, rule, or regulation. So in the anti-corruption world, I mentioned the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act a couple of times, and they're really about 10 steps to having a 10-step compliance program to comply with that law. There are no trade secrets in compliance. Everybody knows the principles. There are about 8 principles in common to every different type of compliance. So once you learn those basics, you can move from industry to industry or law to law.
Hmm.
And your point though is compliance used to be seen as populated by lawyers for lawyers, so you know where that's going. Or my favorite is Doctor No from the Land of No.
Yes.
And I think many business BD types, particularly business development types, did see compliance exactly as you suggested. Oh, they're just going to stop me from doing business. Well, properly seen, that's why I advocate compliance as a business process. Because if something's a business process, you can study it, you can measure it, you can monitor it, you can improve it. And I think an effective compliance program actually makes your business run more efficiently and at the end of the day more profitably. Because if I'm going to hire someone to represent me in a market, whether it's a medical services, pharma, or energy,
Hmm.
and it turns out that person is a crook, they may steal money from me down the road. They may damage my reputation in that market. They may do things to me that I don't even know. And so I want to have some confidence that the person I'm doing business with also does business ethically and in compliance so that one of those nefarious things doesn't happen. And yes, it may take 4 weeks instead of 2 weeks to get somebody approved, but it's a whole lot easier to do that rather than have to retrench after your agent has engaged in some illegal act and your company is now responsible.
Yeah, because there's a saying, like once your name gets kind of thrown in the dirt, it's hard to clean that up. So why not take the little bit of time in the beginning now where you can reach those benefits later and
Right.
you don't have to worry about what may happen because the actual consequences could be a whole lot larger or a big issue. So I do have a couple of areas that I am thinking about when I started to think about compliance and also maybe some future thinking of where things are. And I am in the computer world. So the computer world is we're coming up on some interesting topics such as artificial intelligence and generative AI and regulations that may be coming that way. How does compliance kind of begin to fit within that? Because we know that artificial intelligence is going to, I know that governments, everybody else is going to start looking at how do we regulate this? What does that look like? How do companies begin to be ahead of that and ahead of that curve? And what have you heard so far when it comes to artificial
Sure.
intelligence?
So before I get that, I want to say some words about the business you're in, which
Yeah,
is software,
yeah.
because software is a huge part of compliance.
Hmm.
Product companies in the compliance space, in many ways, lead the discussion around compliance for the very reason that the difference in your professional background and mine. I'm going to look at things as a lawyer. You are not. And so you may look at a compliance problem and say, Tom, why didn't you do it this way? Well, it's because that never would have occurred to me. Uh, you
Right,
know, and that so true innovation and compliance is usually driven by outsiders or people like yourself.
right.
Someone says, I think we can do it better, quicker, more efficiently. And so we've seen a lot of innovation and compliance from technological solutions.
Yeah.
AI, a couple of things. One is AI can be a huge efficiency tool for you. It can make you do things quicker. It can do things for you more quickly. It can write emails for you. It can write a business plan for you. It can write a something for you. The problem with AI is, and ChatGPT is, if you ask ChatGPT to write a policy or you write a query, um, and you get something back, unless you know the answer, you have to go research it to make sure it's told you the right thing.
Right.
And I think an example many people have heard of, and we've all laughed about it a lot, are the lawyers who've gotten into trouble because they filed briefs written by ChatGPT, and ChatGPT just made up cases and put it in the brief. And everybody went, oh, stupid lawyers. Well, that's true. But there's a bigger lesson, which is you you have to know the answer. If you don't
Right.
know the answer that ChatGPT gives you, you've got to go research it and verify it with a second source.
Right.
So if ChatGPT gives me 2 cases to put in a brief, I have to go read those cases to make sure it's a correct site. Well, guess what? That's what every first year lawyer does. They're
Right.
given a brief by a partner and said, go check all these sites and make sure they're correct. And so that is as basic a skill as a lawyer have. And I talked to many lawyers at or near my age, and we all laugh like, oh yeah, that's what I did my first 6 months. Um,
Yes.
so now you're doing that with ChatGPT. What I have found in my business is it it has allowed me to create more. I
Right.
can't say it's made me more efficient, but I can create a whole lot more.
Right.
But there's only one of me, so I can only use so much more stuff. Um, and so um, I can ask a query. I can, like I said, I can say write a policy on gifts, travel, and entertainment. If it spits out a policy, I'm going to know if it's right because I know what the Department of Justice says should be in that policy.
Right.
But if you don't have my knowledge, you may put a wrong policy in place. So that's sort of where we are now. Where compliance is going with the use of Chat GPT is if we can create a truly compliance bot,
Mhm.
meaning there's a ring fence, finite amount of compliance.
Mhm.
Like, so I have 2 trillion gigabytes of docs that I've
Yeah.
collected on compliance. And so if you put all that in a Chat GPT, I would certainly have confidence that the answer is going to be right around compliance. But if you do an open AI Chat GPT, that's when you begin to get into trouble. So that's number one, using it substantively. But you also asked me about the governance of Chat GPT, and that's proving an equal challenge. I got into a debate with someone. A Canadian airline was fined because their chat bot told a customer he was entitled to a refund. Well, it turned out he wasn't.
Mhm.
And my friend said, well, it was his fault. He listened to the chat bot. I said, no, no, no. The Canadian airline put that out under their name and they're responsible. Just like if Tom Fox answered the phone and said Air Canada, and yes, you're entitled to that.
Yeah.
And so that's the responsibility of the company. They have to make sure that number one, is the answer is correct. Number two, that the information that went into making that answer is not invalid because of race, religion, all of the protected categories,
Right.
um, and doesn't have the built-in bias of all of us in there. And that's obviously a bigger struggle because we all have our own biases. So
Yeah.
that's sort of problem one. Problem two is how are you going to govern it? Because
Right.
right now, ChatGPT is seen as a black box when many people, including OpenAI, I think, doesn't know how answers are generated. They
Mhm.
know the algorithms they put in there, but they don't understand how it learns machine learning. It learns itself. So they're struggling with how is it learning and how can we manage that?
Right.
Um, so that's another problem. That's sort of the Canadian airline problem, but it's a little broader than that.
Yes.
So I think many people are struggling with that. For the compliance officer, you type in a query, like I said, spit me out a policy on X, it can spit it out, but unless you either know the answer or you pick up the phone and ask Tom Fox to look at it and say, is it right? You might be putting the wrong policy in place.
It's interesting, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I know a little bit about the technology, and there are capabilities with AI to create what they call agents, and those particular agents could just be focused on, say your 2000 document library, only work on that and provide answers from that. However, you still have to train it to make sure that it is giving you the correct types of answers at what percentage, because I know for a fact that it can't, at this moment, give you 100% unless you are coaching it to do that. So I think it's something that I think everyone needs to be aware of. And I believe as we start to talk about compliance, like you say, utilizing it for policy, utilizing it in governance, you got to be really thoughtful about how you're utilizing that because it is going to be a big deal. So I'm going to dovetail into another area that is just interesting to me because everyone's pulling our data. So all these companies are pulling our data, whether I'm browsing on the internet or I'm going through, companies are doing it as well. So when it comes down to, I know protections on the side of the employee, customer, or whomever's there, and then from the actual companies when they have these breaches. So, how does compliance fit within that, and what are some processes they can put in place? So, as we're talking now, is it all permissions based? And when it comes to compliance, and when you have someone's data, how does that work out?
Sure. So are you familiar with GDPR?
I'm not. Share
Okay.
share with us. Yeah.
General Data Protection Act in Europe. It
Yeah.
is by far the world's most comprehensive data protection program. And
Right.
they have very robust programs. You have to physically opt in if you want to share your data with a company, and they can't make it, opt in or do these other 33 steps like we get in
Yes.
America. So they're very robust. And if your company has data in Europe, it's very well, a lot of protections for the individual employee, individual customer. Not so much in the United States. It is unfortunately a state by state basis. So California has the most robust. In the great state of Texas, where I live, I think a company has to notify a customer within 60 days that their data has been purloined. And that is two lifetimes, in data.
It's a long time.
A long time. So it's really a state by state analysis where compliance comes in to the data protection is trying to write the internal policies to comply with whatever laws you're under. So very robust in Europe. And if your company is covered in Europe, less robust here. But if you take the more conservative approach and write something that will protect you in Europe, you're going to be protected in every state in the United States up and until we get a national data protection law.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense because I sometimes I'm thinking about all of the ideas and all of the data that's out there these companies are gathering, and I'm guessing more data that everyone gets, there's probably more exposure as well to what they're having to kind of go through and take a look at. So the other areas that I think about are is on the finance side. So for a long time, I was with a hospital, and I was over a lot of financial data and information that was there. We know that both for companies, they're having to deal with that. Know that there are many regs that are out there related to finances. How does compliance fit within making sure, from a financial perspective and fraud protection, that companies can implement particular processes to make sure that finance and fraud protections are in place?
Well, if you are in compliance, the first thing you need to do after you finish listening to this podcast is go down to hall and talk to your CISO or your chief technology officer, because they're going to be the ones with the technical expertise and capability to put the defenses in place. I've interviewed enough of those people to understand you need to take a layered approach with multi-factor authentication and other protections, training your employees not to open phishing emails, that sort of thing. If you get a email at 5:03 on Friday from the CEO saying, please transfer $25,000 to this account on my personal authority, pick up the phone and call the CEO,
Right.
even if you've never met him. Just those sorts of basic things. And unfortunately, I think that's where we still are in terms of our defenses. It's really the basics. And if you can put the basics in place, uh, it's sort of the slower bear theory. The bear is going to catch whoever's the slowest, or the bad guys are going to probe and enter those who have the least protections.
Right.
So having those sorts of basic controls in place, training your employees not to open suspicious emails, or at least putting them in some sort of sandbox so they can be opened safely. Um, those are the basics on the defense. Then, if something does happen and if there is a breach, you need to have a robust response procedure and process. And that is literally from the board of directors to the CEO, CISO, compliance, PR, probably HR. You need to have literally a book for that. because it's going to happen. Who do you notify? When do you notify them? How do you deal with a ransom if it's a ransomware? Do
Hmm.
you have insurance that can protect you for that? And then I have some colleagues that actually go around, put on game training where they'll take a day with a senior management team and go through each one of those steps that
Right.
you need to take, because it's, if you don't have it in place, one, you're trying to invent it in the middle of essentially a kidnapping, and that never ends well.
Right. You need to go ahead and plan, have that in place. So I definitely wanted to ask some specific questions about compliance because compliance has been interesting. I've had to interact with compliance, whether it was in healthcare or on the software side. Now I want to kind of talk about your journey, a little bit of kind of what got you to the place of where you ended up creating this compliance podcast network, um, how you found that, and how that continues to fit within your purpose. You mentioned it at the beginning. So tell me, how did you get here, and what made you put this podcast network together?
Sure. So I started podcasting in 2012, almost as a natural extension of blogging, and it just seemed to be the next logical step. So I had my first podcast then, and in 2017, I had the bright idea to create a podcast network. And there are three big trade players, companies, I should say, in my version of compliance, which is anti-corruption compliance. So I went around to all three and said, "Hey, let's do a consortium. We will pool all our resources in the podcast format, and we will be the one place for all compliance professionals to go for information in the podcast format. I don't want to take away from anything else you're doing, your print work, your digital work, conferences, and not that I would ever suggest anything anti-competitive. Oh, by the way, we'll corner all the market on advertising."
Right.
And I could get no interest. They all said no. And so I just said, bleep it, I'll do it myself. So I
Yeah.
did. And so putzed around for a couple of years. And in 2019, I said, you're either going to have to fully commit to this or go back to practicing law and move it to hobby status. It's sort of the universe had the door open. I had to walk through it.
Yeah.
And so I walked through that door at the end of I bought all the cool toys. I built this huge network, had this huge infrastructure. At the end of the year, I made about $10,000. And I thought, well, that was an interesting experiment because I had to go back to practicing law. And
Yeah.
so I did in Q1 of 2020 until March 15 when they shut the country down.
Right.
And so all the work dried up because no one knew what was going to happen. And then about 2 months later, starting about May 15, I got a call from every product provider in compliance with the same question, which was how long to get access to your network. Because pre-pandemic, almost all marketing and compliance was done in person. Trade shows,
Right.
conferences, breakfast roundtables, lunches, etc. And of course, none of that was available. Well, by 2019, I had the largest social media presence in compliance because I'm a social media marketing hammer machine, and I always have been. And so I got these calls because they couldn't market, and I had 50,000 daily followers, and so my answer to them was 24 hours because I had this huge network,
Yeah.
and it was just a plug and play or a drop and drag kind of situation. And
Yeah.
so, but if I hadn't done all that work and lost all that money the year before, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question like I did. But my little world just blew up, and I had started getting 250,000 downloads a month.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty much full-time podcast now.
That is an awesome story because it really shows that you ended up putting in a lot of effort and a lot of work in something you didn't know was going to happen, but you already had everything kind of in place for when the opportunity actually presented itself.
So one of my
That's
favorite phrases is when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. And that's exactly what happened to me.
and none of us knew that the pandemic was going to hit that way, and so now it looked like you were just prepared for that particular time in that moment, and look at what has happened occurred from there. I, of course, one of my things I encourage anybody to do when we're talking about our purpose and producing lives is that sometimes we will be called to do something that doesn't look like it's working out in the immediate time frame. But over time, you keep putting in the effort, and like you said, sounds like you put in the effort on social media, you put in the effort into podcasting with the infrastructure and the build out. That when it was time, you did have that kind of. It was like a crosshairs, everything lined up, and everybody could then participate. And you started off with a vision. So that vision was having a network, and everyone didn't see it at first, but it seems like they were all on board after the pandemic hit, and they say, oh, you know what? I want to be a part of this great network that you've put together. So as you have kind of gone on this journey, and it sounds like there were particular moments in your life where sounds like the accident played a major role. And when you had that moment in, back after the accident, what was what was that? I guess that motivation, was it just money? Was it something inside of you? How was that moment for you that kind of gave you a shift and a change in your life?
Well, so I was 52, I guess, when that accident happened. And I guess for the first time in my life, I realized I could do anything I wanted. And so I just thought about it and figured out this is what I want to do. And the two best pieces of advice I got were from one woman who I met through social media. And she said, if you want to do that, that's fine, but don't be like every lawyer I know and take every piece of work that comes in the door. You do that only.
Right,
And you tell people you're going to do that, whatever that is. And the second thing is you got to give yourself a year. Just commit to a year. And that's what led to the 2019 experiment. But
right,
she was right on both. And 6 months after I started, I had a worldwide consulting practice literally out of my office at home, which was way before work from home. And at that point, I didn't leave the house except to go to physical therapy. So I
right.
couldn't go have dinner, couldn't go to a meeting, couldn't go to a conference, couldn't go to lunch, and everything was virtual. So I was doing that back then because I had to.
Right. Yeah. And so you were already kind of in preparation for what was happening. Sounds like the life experience did kind of it spur you into this purpose that you're in today. I'm gonna leave you with this question of, so now you are where you are. You've gone on this journey. What are three things that you would either tell yourself by going back and saying, hey, what are those three things that are just key items that you should tell yourself, or you would tell our audience today that are the most beneficial items, whether it's with compliance or with this journey that you've had, that you would leave with them to say, hey, this is something you should really focus on and think about.
So I've been asked that first question a fair amount, and here's my answer because it's the truth. Nothing. There's nothing I could have told my 25-year-old self. I knew everything there was to know. I didn't want to hear a thing. You were an idiot, and I knew it all. And there's not one thing, not two things, not three things I could have gone back and told myself. So, um, but as for your audience, I would say the universe will always open a door. Just have the courage to walk through and have the courage of your conviction. If your conviction is, I want to start a company that plants trees, beautiful, brilliant. You just keep to that conviction and stick with it, and your higher power will provide for you.
Tom, I think that is a great wisdom to be able to share and provide. Thank you for taking the time to share this great journey that you've had from all the way from the corporate world and figuring things out. And I love to talk to especially my children and say, hey, as you're going through this life and you're walking through, try a lot of different things. You're going to find out what you don't like or what you can't do anymore. You move on to the next thing that you can do. And sounds like your journey was just a part of that, and the focus and where you are at this moment has allowed you to get to this place where you're evangelizing compliance. We're going to need way more of it as we're coming up. I brought up some of the technologies that we're having today and all that's going on with these companies that I need to put it in place. where can my audience find you and be able to catch up and connect with you in the future, Tom?
Sure. So the network is the Compliance Podcast Network. You can find that at www.compliancepodcastnetwork.net. I'm on LinkedIn as Thomas R. Fox. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. If you're so inclined to go fairly old school, you can call me at 832-744-0264. Um, or there's a place on my website that you can send me an email as well called SpeakPipe. So reach out. I'd love to talk to you if you're interested in compliance, if you're interested in podcasting, if you're interested in your own journey. And I guess the thing that really intrigued me about you, Randy, was the first time we met, when we first chatted, and I said compliance, I could just see your eyes roll inside of your head. It's like this guy's going to talk to me about purpose and compliance, and that's exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell
Yeah.
people that you can have a purpose. It doesn't matter. Capitalism's not bad. Businesses can do a lot of good, even in when they're trying to make money, and I've always sort of known that, and now I get to practice that every day.
Yeah, and compliance is not a bad word. Compliance is actually needed. I've had to help some of the implementations that we've done to help implement compliance in many ways. Just like you said, it's a business process. And I've implemented multiple business processes that have helped many of the companies make sure that they are within regulations, within law, and that we are also, from a technical perspective, making sure that we're doing the right. Tom, I really do appreciate you coming on and keeping up the work and sharing about a topic that, yes, when I first heard, I'm like, compliance? Really? I remember talking to the compliance people. They were always saying no, but it is definitely been eye-opening. Thank you for sharing and continuing to share. And anyone that's definitely interested in compliance, please go check out the Compliance Podcast Network. Check out Tom Fox and what he's sharing. And I believe that we can utilize that. And I just love your journey. Thank you for sharing your story of how you got to a place where you have a purpose. Part of your purpose is to be able to evangelize, share compliance. Thanks, Tom, for being on. And I appreciate you coming on to the podcast. Produce on purpose. Thank you.